You were listening to Pat Caddell. He's a Democratic pollster, formerly of the Carter administration. He's obviously become far more of a centrist in subsequent years. But he says essentially that, quote, I think we're at the most dangerous time in our political history in terms of the balance of power and the role that the media plays and whether or not we maintain a free democracy. And, of course, he's referencing how really the press doesn't seem to have been very eager to make inquiries about what exactly happened in Benghazi, Libya. It does appear as if the take on all that occurred is very, very kaleidoscopic. Let me, without delay, go ahead and introduce old friend of the show, Bob Weiner, Robert Weiner, if you will, Democratic strategist, columnist, former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging. Bob, good to have you back.
It's good to be with you, Alan. And a note of correction, because I worked with Pat Caddell in the McGovern campaign. That's how far back he goes. And me.
Oh, my God. Well, he was with Carter as well. McGovern, well, you know, you go back to the Truman administration.
Yeah, I go back to the Harding administration.
We had fewer states in our country when you kicked off in politics. I'm just kidding. Anyway, joining us as well, significantly younger. We will have around the corner Kristen Kukowski, press secretary for the Republican National Committee. We're hoping to have her in just a bit. Bob, apropos of what Pat had to say, he's a nice enough guy. I've seen him at a number of functions and seems to be a clear-headed thinker. And on this, I don't know that he's far off the point, because let's take a look at some facts. Let's go back. September 11th, okay, just last month. We're attacked at our embassy in Benghazi. We lose Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Management Officer Sean Smith. I think he also was an Air Force vet. We lose 2 former Navy SEALs, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty. However, after Obama had repeatedly blamed an anti-Muslim video produced out of California as the cause behind this uncontrolled riot that turned into a very, very violent act, as he puts it forward. But again, on the 19th, which was still corrected by his own director of counterterrorism, testifying on Capitol Hill that it was actually planned terrorism, Obama held to the video story anyway, Bob. He did so really right up to the 26th of September, when his press secretary finally said that Obama also says it's terrorism, despite refusing to do so multiple times, even after the U.S. intelligence affirmed it as such. What's your take on all this, Bob? I mean,
they went back and forth. Hillary was saying terror, but then they also said the video. It actually, Alan, was a combination of the two. It was the terror alliance using the excuse of the video. So it was neither right nor wrong. But I got to tell you, what Obama said about, and the people around Obama said about Benghazi didn't compare to what George Bush did of saying Iraq had WMDs and caused the entire horror of the Iraq War, which took us 10 years to get out of and which the American people really resented. It's not the same. It took Obama 2 weeks to correct his error. George Bush to this day has not corrected his error.
Yeah, but by that measure, Bob, nobody's ever held accountable for anything ever again, because he or she, respectively, can always point to something that could be argued as far worse. And, of course, by that measure, there is no accountability.
When has George Bush corrected his error on Iraq about WMDs? When? Didn't happen. To this day.
He didn't admit what error was committed. What error was committed?
Colin Powell went in front of the UN and said these were weapons, and in fact it was vacuum tubes. The fact that there was a report to the UN that Saddam Hussein was accurate about, saying they destroyed their WMDs, and we didn't find any. Those minor details.
Anyway, every year is Alan Nathan, the militant moderate. Once again, this is the oasis for those who have an aversion to the left-right, black-white, two-dimensional approach. We're listening to Vice Presidential GOP candidate Paul Ryan, Republican from the great state of Wisconsin, otherwise chair of the House Budget Committee, telling Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace that in their plan to lower taxes, that they would make it revenue neutral. Now, Mr. Wallace, for some reason, has difficulty coming to terms with this concept. He doesn't understand revenue neutral is an actual mathematical total value, if you will. And he seemed not to hear an answer that he was demanding over and over. Anyway, without further ado, assisting me in the opining, old friend of the show, none other than Bob Weiner, Robert Weiner, if you please, Democratic strategist, columnist, former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey, former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging, former communications director for Congressman Rangel and Conyers of New York and Michigan, respectively. Bob, good to have you back.
Alan, Chris Wallace is one of the few people with real integrity on Fox. And he was absolutely right when he said you can't be revenue neutral. First of all, Ryan's the guy who says he ran a 2:50 marathon and it took him 4 hours. And he's the budget chair, so good with numbers, right? Second of all, what Wallace is talking about is Romney-Ryan's plan says a $5 million tax cut and $2 million more for the military. That's $7 million more. How do you get revenue neutral out of that? You bust the budget and you make the deficit even worse. That's the Romney-Ryan plan.
Barack Obama, who was given 4 Pinocchios, the asinine assertion that 90% of the debt he accumulated was courtesy of George W. Bush. You have to have a level of ignorance of such breathtaking proportion to ever come out with a statement like that. And I was grateful for the Washington Post for disabusing him with those 4 Pinocchios. What was your reaction to that development?
My reaction was it's 2/3 of the debt, because the debt is $16 trillion and it was $10 trillion coming in. It's $16 trillion now. The Washington Post is in conflict with itself, because it also showed that the Bush tax cuts, which Obama mistakenly agreed to and now is not going to anymore, but the Bush tax cuts plus the Afghanistan-Iraq wars give you 2/3 of the deficit, plus the need to correct the crash impact of the financial debacle is virtually the rest of it, and that gives you the 90%. So you can make that case, and the Washington Post gave the chart that showed the pie chart where those numbers added up exactly that way.
If all the debt and everything that goes wrong is never your guy's fault but his predecessor, then that means the guy who follows Obama is going to be able to do the same thing with him. Do you feel that would be credible?
Obama has to take responsibility for trying to fix the mess, and he is trying to do that. I don't disagree with that, but it is also true of where the numbers come from. 2/3 from the war and the tax cuts, and the other third, essentially almost 100%, therefore, from fixing the economic mess of the crash he got handed. Those are true statements.
You're forgetting about his half of TARP. You're forgetting about the CBO slapping on an extra $1 trillion in cost versus what his original projections were for Obamacare. You're forgetting about the stimulus package that was more political than it was stimulative. You talk about the fact that the vast majority of those funds went down the crapper because all they did was prop up continued bad funding organization on the part of too many state governments shelling out too many dollars to their public unions.
All right.
At one point or another, Bob, the math doesn't work for you.
Let's take them one by one, Alan. The stimulus was 40% tax cuts that Obama agreed to because the Republicans wanted them in there. How'd those work out for creating jobs? TARP was under Bush. Let's get the dynamic.
No, TARP was in 2 parts.
That's correct.
He only spent half the money under his,
right,
and he allowed the remaining half to go to Obama. But if I hadn't said that, you wouldn't have recognized it.
During the Bush presidency.
Bush would never be permitted to do, and that is blame his predecessor for the debt that accumulated on his watch. Why is that, Bob?
I think Clinton got it exactly right, since you mentioned Clinton, that it's a matter of arithmetic. And the arithmetic is the cost of the wars and the tax cuts are what are driving us deeper and deeper into debt.
Why is the assumption, why does the government have the right to expect different taxes to take the place of others that they've granted? Why is that?
Your taxes are going to Boeing, Lockheed, and Northrop Grumman, charging 10 times as much as traditional military. That is the problem that we are spending. We are spending ourselves blue in the face with our military.